Pa says it was something called free speech that led to all the fuss. He says that comes as no big surprise, since two things that darn near always lead to consternation is anything that is free and most any kind of speech. Something just naturally happens to a man that unhinges him when he's making a speech, Pa says. His lungs huff up, pump too much air to his brain, which swells up, a-thinking it's mighty big, but it ain't full of nothing but that air. Pa says that listening to a speech is like watching a chipmunk try to drive a car. And free stuff, like giveaways, is surefire to attract folks. People come a-running if they think it's free. It don't matter what you got to offer. And if you combine the two into one and get free speech in front of a big crowd, well then, you're just asking for trouble. That's what Pa says, like shaking hands with a rabid coon. Pa ain't much for big crowds. When I asked him what free speech was exactly, Pa said it was talk that wasn't worth nothing. Like listening to Clarence McGonigal go on with his story about the 1953 hailstorm. Lord, is that ever a blow-up? Mr. McGonigal has got it down to the point where Pa says the story lasts longer than the storm ever did. And there's more wind in it, too. And over the years, Pa says that Mr. McGonigal has growed his hailstones up from the size of walnuts to ripe peaches. Before he dies, Pa says he expects Mr. McGonigal will be hailing watermelons. Pa says that's a prime example of a man exercising his right to free speech. The more he does it, the freer and freer it gets. And Pa says the miracle of it is that people most always get exactly what they paid for in the bargain. Pa calls that a fair trade, and he thinks that's getting to be a rarity today. What got him started on all that free speech was a whole new kind of holiday celebration, which Pa said was called the Passel of Fools. It happens near the end of the year, around Christmas time. Now, I've heard of the Yule log, and the manger, and the mistletoe, and even the boar's head, which don't sound like much of a celebration to me, whooping it up over a pig's head. Mrs. Hutchins told us about that at school. But the Passel of Fools was a new one on me, and Pa said that was because it had just gotten started. Fools been around for years and years, son, he told me. Almost since the dawn of time. Never been no shortage of fools. But it looks like now the time has come when they starting to get organized. So I asked him a few questions, and Pa told me a little more about this brand new celebration. And he said, since I was so curious, that we was going to go see it, him and me, together, as a part of my overall education. This came as good news to me, and more than a little exciting, as Pa and I have had many a good time together out on our adventures into the world. That's what Pa calls them, adventures. You think you can learn maybe all you need to know from living on a farm or sitting in a schoolroom or listening to Mrs. Hutchins go on, but just when you figure you've seen it all, you go to traveling to one place or another, and I can practically guarantee that wherever you go, you'll see something surprising, particularly as it relates to people and their ways. Some folks has got some mighty strange ways. Over the years, just around the end of December, as the year is winding down, we've seen the Holiday City of Lights and the Great Toy Train Exhibition and the North Pole Workshop, and we've heard the non-denominational choir of all faiths, seasonal favorites sing along, the Kwanzaa Steel Band and Quilt Show, and now Pa said it was time to introduce me to this new festivity, the Passel of Fools. He promised it would be a real eye-opener. He knows that I have figured out a thing or two about Santa Claus, and he told me directly that this here jamboree would give me something else to believe in. This here ain't no children's make-believe, Pa said. This is what we call the more adult material. But I assure you, it will be fantastic, and then some. You're probably wondering, what is a passel of fools? I was thinking the same thing myself. Pa says that a fool or two is nothing to get worked up about. They's common as weeds. But any time there is an entire passel of them coming together, then you really got something. A natural wonder. Like the squash the widow Crenshaw grew, that looked exactly like that feller who used to sing and dance on Lawrence Welk. That was an uncanny resemblance. Looked just like him, and that squash was on its way to the state fair, and word was that it might even go to New York and the David Letterman show, except that Phil Cooley, who was helping the widow Crenshaw, dropped the squash, and it broke, and then it didn't look like much of anything. And that was the end of that. Kind of like old Humpty Dumpty. But as I was saying, when you have an entire contingent of fools gathered together in one place, making up a whole passel, then the combined foolishness amounts to something on the order of the spectacular, like an eclipse, a double rainbow, a volcano, or purple snow. And so when that happens, it's best to go and take a good hard look at them. Keep it in mind to maintain a safe distance, like you would with hungry lions or door-to-door magazine salesmen.